This is an additional video that I will do twice. The first version of this will be for chapters 1 to 3, which we've already gone through and done live sessions for, and then there will be a second version of this for chapters 4, 5, and 6. These are questions that people have asked outside of the live sessions if they were unable to make it. If you have any questions for chapters 4, 5, 6, make sure to add them in here. I'll send out the link to this document. Some of these questions do overlap with some of the information in live sessions, but this gives me the opportunity to prepare a little bit more, so hopefully these answers will be that much more better. So let's start. Chapter 1, your personal monopoly. There's 3 questions that I'll go through sequentially. First one is, I'd like to ask, how did you promote this ebook that we all bought? What was your strategy? Which steps did you take? And how much was the result affected by your good reputation / being an expert in the field? Great question. I'll start actually almost in reverse order and say that it certainly was impacted by my reputation. And something to note there is, I'm not special in the sense that I have a reputation now, but if you go back 2 years ago, I had no following on Twitter, hadn't created any products, didn't have a personal blog. I was, quote unquote, a nobody. And so although today the result of this book was benefited from my reputation or my following, I'm not unique in that you can also do the same thing. And I talked about this in both of the live sessions because a similar question came up where basically in marketing, you have many different versions of funnels, but basically what you need to do is set up a funnel, right? And the top of the funnel is anyone that knows of you, cares about you, has any sort of proximity to you. And so if I had written the exact same book, the exact same chapters, the exact same information, the exact same infographics, everything about the book was the same. If I even did the exact same tweets, the exact same promotional material 2 years ago, nothing would have happened. I literally would have gotten, probably no more than 10 sales. Today, I benefited from the following that I had and things that I had built up with this funnel over 2 years or so. And those 2 years were composed of me launching several products, me writing on my own blog, me being employed by companies like The Hustle, which had larger followings. So yes, certainly I've benefited from having a good reputation. There's no single correct way to build a reputation in any given field. You can build up a Twitter following, you can create your own blog and have that be your funnel, but you do need some sort of funnel where people care about you. Now, with that said, let's jump to some of the other questions where I'll actually show a little bit more. What strategy and what steps did you take? So given where I already was, I did have a following. There were certain things that I can do, and I'll speak to a couple of them. So the first is, this actually started as, it was never meant to be a book, or initially it wasn't meant to be a book. I basically stumbled on an outline that I had written around a year ago. I found it. I honestly wanted just a little bit more motivation to actually go and create this thing. And so I tweeted online, if I finish this, is this something that people would pay for? You can see that this tweet reached quite a few people. I was very clear, it'll include blah, blah, blah. I hadn't written it yet. I had a basic outline for what I was thinking. And again, this was originally meant to be more so a guide, probably 10,000, 20,000 words, was not, at least at this point, going to be a book. But basically what happened is you can see a lot of people here were like, hell yes, please publish. Some people were, saying I would pay much more than this. Et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of these people were like, yes, 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 yes. So this was motivation for me to start. What I did this exact day, you can see 11 a.m. by, here we go. Let's open this tweet up actually. By 3 p.m., I had, gotten so much of a response that I decided, I'm going to go and create a pre-sale, did it on Gumroad, and started it at $10. And what I did, and this is something that I do think has benefited me, and many people have actually talked about this, is that I did a tiered pricing strategy. So what I did is I said, I was originally going to charge $10, but people are telling me to charge more. I don't actually know where this should fall. Should I charge $10, $20, $30 more? I'm not sure. And so the best way for me at the time to kind of, get information or get a signal as to where that price should fall, I did a tiered pricing strategy, which basically was starts at $10. For every 30 orders, it's going to increase, and I increased it by $5. You can see pretty quickly within the first 15 minutes, I had sold quite a few copies. So yes, this initial surge of purchases definitely was a result of me having a following and people who were listening to me at the very beginning. But I would say some things that are replicable are that you can also have almost like a tiered pricing strategy that plays into scarcity and people, more likely to buy if they hit your page. The other thing that I would say is doing a pre-sale is, I've found super beneficial, because if you think about it, when you launch a product, you only have normally one launch, and then you might have future launches if you add features and stuff like that. But at the beginning, you have a single launch, and you better hope people are listening at that launch. But with a pre-sale, you can effectively add a launch. And what that means is, basically, you can see here, I announced that I'm doing this guide, and you can pre-buy it here. And that was effectively a launch. And you can actually see that in my dashboard. So you can see this was the pre-sale over here, and I made a couple $1,000s. And then this was the interim when I was actually making the guide. And then when I launched, I basically had another launch, right? And so instead of just having one launch, which probably would have looked much smaller had it just been a single launch, the pre-sale one got me sales. It got me around a couple hundred sales in total before the book actually was created. And then I basically had another launch where I said, hey, everyone, this is ready. And then the great thing about that is I had hundreds of people, really closely listening because they had already purchased the book. So that's another kind of small tactic that I can share. Now, there's a couple other things that I want to mention here too. So one, talk about this in the book, but building in public has been very, 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 very helpful for me, not just with this book, but in general. But you can see here, what I did is during this, if we look back here, maybe 6-week period or something, at least a month period, I was sending very consistent updates on Twitter, which was the main channel that drove most of the sales. So you can see here, actually the sources of my sales, and direct is some combination of many things. But you can see Twitter pretty much drove a very significant number of sales. Trends did as well, and I'll talk about that later. That was something that happened post-launch. But basically, what I did is I gave very consistent updates, fun updates, not super serious, but days that I had literally spent the entire weekend or the entire day sequentially at the computer. No joke. I did that multiple times. You can see this is actually a tweet of a tweet. I also shared the table of contents before it actually launched. And so you can see there's actually several examples on my Twitter of things like this where I had been updating people. And then, as I said, during that interim period, I had been building in the open, getting people to care about this thing. And then on the day of, I launched it. And by that point, hundreds of people were listening, lots of people retweeting it, engaging with it. Then even after I launched, I continued and still continue to add minor updates like, okay, milestones, hit 14K, painted this thing, hit, a bigger day or a record day, hit 30K, etc. And this thread has gotten, as you can see, a lot of response. If we actually look in analytics, it's reached 100,000 people, which is crazy. So this has been really beneficial for me. I'll talk about a couple more things. Indie Hackers was also beneficial for me. Didn't drive as many sales, but it was, again, a way to get in front of people. And so you can see this is the indie or the milestones for my blog overall. And you can see here that this was the launch milestone, or sorry, not even the launch milestone, the pre-sale launch milestone, which, got a lot of attention. Also some sales. I did another one when I hit 7K, and then I did one on recently when I actually launched. So this got a lot of attention as well. So this was beneficial to me. I will say that again, my reputation, I don't know if that's the right word for it, but my following, which I built up over the last several years, really benefited me. But the one thing that I want to call out in particular, which was very intentional, is not even actually related to acquisition, but related to getting people to actually utilize your product, which is super underrated. And so let me quickly go through what I mean here. So this is a post that I made in the Trends group. So you might have seen that there's some traffic from Facebook and also Trends. So I work for Trends. That has certainly benefited me. I posted in the Trends Facebook group once, and then I also got lucky in the Trends team, was cool with us basically featuring the guide, which brought a bunch more sales. But what I want to call out is not that this post got me a bunch of sales, but what I call out here, and this was actually pre-launch. So this is, I think, 2 weeks or so before the guide was even launched. And I gave the Trends group some ideas in terms of why I think my pre-sale went super well. So I'll go through them super quickly. Narrow your path to feedback. So again, instead of hypothesizing, what do people want? Should I create this thing? I basically just said, hey, will you guys pay for this? And that was the narrowest way to actually get concrete feedback in terms of if someone actually wanted this, are they willing to put money behind this, their credit card down for this? If not, I think a lot of the feedback that we get these days is really sugar-coated, and this is a way to very directly learn, do people really want this? The second is this tiered pricing strategy that I mentioned. Instead of me, again, hypothesizing what I should price this at, I basically increased the price until I saw the conversion rate drop off very significantly, and then held it at $30. As I mentioned as well, building in the open. And then these two things are super, super key. So the first one is on the landing page, on the Gumroad landing page, which I can pull up. Actually, let me just pull it up here. So on this landing page, I'm cognizant that I built an ebook, B, something about writing online, and C, it's on Gumroad. So what I'm getting at here is I'm basically creating something that a lot of people, rightfully so, likely have reservations about, because there's a lot of products on Gumroad that aren't high quality. There's a lot of online guides out there that are not high quality, and things like that. So I was very, very clear on my landing page that I'm basically creating this thing because I want something better out there to exist. And so I give an overview of what it is, but then I also very clearly say, why learn from me? I also make it very clear that, where is it on here? I found in my blog on the principles that there isn't enough quality content out there. If you're worried that this will be another shitty ebook and don't find it's worth your money when it drops, I will happily process a refund for you. And so I wanted to make it super clear. I'm not trying to kind of trick people into paying me for something that's low quality. I wanted it to be super clear that this was going to be better than what else is out there. So I talk about this in the guide a little bit. Calming concerns, finding any reason that someone would not purchase this, and trying to address that with the copy. But even past that, I added a lot of trust signals, like how many copies have been sold. I added the table of contents. This was super intentional because as someone who's considering buying this, they want to know exactly what's in it. But again, to calm concerns that, this isn't some guide with 30 pages of junk. I was very clear with my table of contents in terms of addressing exactly what would be in the book and how much depth it would go into. But finally, the main thing that I think people, there was actually an Indie Hackers post that was kind of funny, and it was like, why has Steph's ebook been doing so well? And a lot of people hypothesized many different reasons, which were all pretty thoughtful and accurate. But this is the one that most people miss, and I think is actually the most important. And it's this idea of setting your customers up for success. And what I mean by that is, particularly with digital content products, it's very likely that people either don't finish a course, don't read your book, even if they put money into it. And what that does is a couple things. But one, it leaves your customer less satisfied, even though it really is on them for not completing the course or the book or whatever you're providing for them. it leaves them feeling less satisfied with their decision to purchase from you. But even more so than that, you can post on Twitter, you can post on Indie Hackers, you can create a big launch. But post-launch, what's actually going to drive your success is people talking about your product, right? And the precursor to people talking about your product is A, that you create an excellent product, but B, that people actually engage with your product and get the value. Because even if you create a great book, if no one reads it, those people aren't going to go and tell other people about your book. So I did everything that I could to think about the reasons that someone may not actually engage with the book, and I tried to address that in multiple ways. So a couple of different ways that I did it. So one is I actually reached out to pre-subscribers to find out if there's anything missing so I can actually create a wonderful book, hopefully, once I had created the table of contents. But then two other things that I did very intentionally are, one, I created these live sessions that maybe you guys have been participating in, where I said, some people don't have time to read a 70,000 word book, but if not, I'm going to create these live sessions. They're hopefully going to be a little more engaging. They might not go through everything, but if you attend them, you'll get the content, you'll get the information as well. And I also created a community on Telegram to hopefully get more people involved so they can ask questions there as well. I allowed people to ask additional questions like the ones that I'm covering in this video. And then finally, within the book itself, if you read the book, there is 2 pages at the very beginning that are dedicated to saying exactly how someone should use this book, so that they read it like a textbook, not a novel, so that it really shows them that, if you access it in these ways, you'll get more benefit from it. And those were all super intentional so that people actually utilize the book. And then now that hundreds of people have actually read the book, instead of hundreds of people buying the book and not reading it, all those people, or many of those people, have now gone on to ask and to be affiliates, to just organically tell people about it. So I actually had more of a post-launch plan set up, and I'll probably execute some of those things at some point. But I've been very lucky that because I invested so much in focusing on getting people to consume the product, they've actually done much of the marketing for me since. So that's what I would say in terms of the question, just going back to it. How did I promote it? Well, yes, I benefited from my audience, but I also did a bunch of things that I do think are replicable for other people. So adding a pre-sale adds an extra launch. Use a tiered pricing strategy if it makes sense for you to to use scarcity and get people to purchase, so that when you have the full launch, you have people listening. Really invest in calming concerns or addressing any sort of concerns that someone might have within the copy on your page, but then also work to make your product more easily consumable, whether it's through live sessions, whether it's through the structuring of your content, but really focus on that, because again, if no one actually reads what you create or utilizes what you create, they can't access the value, and therefore, even if you make a bunch of pre-sales, those people won't really be your mechanism for continuous growth, which is what ended up happening for me. Because remember, if I just go back to here, the actual launch was, the pre-sale was here. So that pre-sale was not as big as this big spike, but actually this was the launch. So the biggest spike that I got was actually the culmination of people who had read the book and started sharing it, and that's what resulted in this huge day of 7,000 sales. So that's my, advice to anyone who's considering creating something similar. And yeah, hopefully that's helpful. All right, let's move on to the second question. Can you please show an example of how to use the Reddit tool to find niche communities? I don't understand how the web subreddits can help with this. Thank you. Sure. So the tool that they're referring to is this one called Anvaka. I don't know why it's called that, but in any case, I gave an example of this on the last live session, but let's say I'm trying to write a finance blog, let's say, or finance newsletter. Well, if I'm not really sure exactly what subreddits to access or what types of communities I might want to access, or even potentially exactly what I want to write about, this is a wonderful way to get started. So if I find a subreddit, you can start with a very large one, or you can start with a small one. I use r/finance, which has 412,000 subscribers. So here's some of the many ways that you can use this tool. So first on here, you can see what are the, hot or controversial or new top rising posts. So you get a sense of what people care about on this subreddit. And remember, in the book, I talk about how subreddits, they are distribution channels, but they're also communities, right? They have their own moderators, they have their own rules, they have certain types of people, which are your audience, hopefully, within there. But this tool also helps you then see the other communities that you can either join or learn from, right? So in here, r/finance, but then you start to get a sense of, oh, actually, there's a bunch of communities about day trading or machine learning or Forex, things like that. So maybe you want to read about that, maybe not, maybe that's not a fit. There's also stuff like lean fire, fat fire, financial independence overall. There's things about economics or business, more macro stuff, entrepreneurship. And so you get a sense of the different types of communities you can join. So each of these you could join, and as long as you abide by the rules, these potentially are places that you can share your articles or your newsletter, again, depending on the rules. But what you can also do is, let's say I want to actually write a newsletter about just financial independence. This gives me, you can just double click on any of them to have that be the central node. You can see, again, the adjacent nodes about things that you might want to write about. And then within this, I can, for example, like I recognize if someone's interested in financial independence, they're probably interested in the stock market, and maybe they use Robinhood, and that gives me a really good understanding of potentially who I'm trying to reach. But also with this information, I can then go into other tools like Slowfile is one that I mentioned in the book, where you can discover other Slack communities. So for example, if I'm interested in finance, I might enter that and see there's crypto or tech finance. There's tons of different Slack communities that you can find here. Let's say I'm interested in the stock market. There may be, there's 2 different communities in here related to the stock market. So again, this I think is a great place to find subreddits, which in itself are communities that you can leverage or participate in, but also to learn about your user. And one of the better examples that I have found is this subreddit longevity. So r/longevity has 60,000 subscribers, so real, sizable subreddit, not huge. But this, if I wanted to write a newsletter about longevity, this gives me such a great understanding of who my target audience might be. Remember in the first chapter, we talk about your 100 true fans. And so here, I already probably have a sense of vaguely what someone interested in longevity might care about, but this gives me so much more nuance. So for example, I really get a sense of, that this person probably cares a lot about their body, and not just their body, but probably is a fan of or someone researching biohacking, right? Because you see things like nootropics, supplements, keto science, testosterone, powerlifting, kratom, which is something that, I think a lot of people use in Bali, microdosing. So really interesting, right? So this gives me a sense of that they might be interested in this, but also maybe I want to write about those things. Microbiome, but also you can see these other nodes where it's, okay, this person probably also really cares or is interested in science, and not just science, but specifically technology, machine learning, artificial intelligence, singularity. They're probably pretty technical. And then this other section, which I'm not even sure, I'm not familiar with what dark futurology is or transhumanism is, but this, again, it gives you just such a great view of who you might want to be targeting. And then also with any of these, so dark futurology, for example, let's say I didn't know anything about dark futurology, which is pretty accurate. I can see, there's 50,000 subscribers. Again, I can see what people who are interested in dark futurology are talking about. And then you can also augment it with this tool, which is called subreddit stats. And if I go in here, and the benefit of this Anvaka tool, which I find more useful is that I can start with anything, right? Again, a big subreddit, a small subreddit, and it gives me all of this information. It's almost like filling in the gaps for me. Now, this subreddit stats tool has other functionality, but in order to use this tool, you need to basically know what subreddit you're looking up already, right? So once I find a subreddit in here, I can put it into subreddit stats. I get a bunch of other information like the description, again, top submissions. Let's do all time. You can see what are the top submissions. I can actually link out to this and read the submissions if I really wanted to. But then in addition to that, for any subreddit that you enter into here, you can see top keywords for that particular subreddit. Related subreddits as well, similar to Anbaka, top posters, things like that. So hopefully that helps you. Again, just to summarize, this subreddit tool is good for finding subreddits, which in themselves are niche communities, and then you can actually utilize that information either to just learn more about your audience and your users and the potential topics that you want to write about, or you can actually use that within tools like Slowfile to find additional communities that are on other channels. Okay, question number 3. You note that you were happy that you waited to launch your blog until after you had developed experience and unique expertise. Would you recommend waiting to someone who is in the midst of developing said expertise? If not, how would you recommend working in public while developing experience versus once having achieved expertise? So I talk about this in the first live session, and I don't think there is an absolute right answer here. And what I mean by that is, if you imagine a spectrum, here's kind of like a visual representation of it, where on the left, you have absolutely no expertise, you're completely new to a space, and then on the right, you are the best in the world at that thing. Now, there is no perfect time here to actually start participating, even though maybe I alluded to that in the book. There is no perfect time. And in fact, I mentioned this quote in the book where anything that you've spent an above average time learning can be translated into information that is going to be valuable to the average person, which means in this visual representation, anywhere you are in here, let's say you're the triangle, anyone to the left of you can benefit from you parsing information that you know effectively. And so to answer your question more specifically, I don't think there's a perfect time for you to start. However, I would say, actually just going back to this, if you're starting and you're here and you're completely kind of green in the space, or actually white in this case, you have so much fewer people who can benefit from you, versus if you're here, you have all these people that can benefit from your expertise. And not only that, but there's a bigger delta between you and many people, right? So the amount that they can benefit from you is also increased. Now, what I would say is, if you are developing expertise in a space, building in public is more like sharing updates, right? So for example, in here, when I actually talked about what I did in launching the book, I'm not actually sharing an article about writing an ebook in this case, because I'm not an expert on that. But I am sharing updates. So the difference between building in the open and actually, I think, creating things sometimes is that building in the open is kind of like part of the way there, and not actually, you're not actually sharing all of the value. So I think at all times, build in the open, if it makes sense for you. It obviously doesn't make sense for everyone. So share your work in the open, but just know that as you're developing expertise, it's going to be harder for you to build up that audience. Just know that, have that expectation that because you may be further to the left on that spectrum, less people can benefit from you. It's harder for you to find people that can benefit from you, and therefore your efforts may be less successful than if you were to start in 3 years. There's nothing wrong with starting today, just again, having that expectation. And if you're just doing it, if you're writing to, build up the right habit and because you enjoy it, then there's nothing wrong with that. I think the problems can come when you have incorrect expectations, where you think that As long as I write an article once a week, people will start listening. I think that can happen, but the bigger that gap is, again, between you and the people that you can help, the easier it's going to be for you. So again, no correct time. The reason I shared the anecdote from my experience is just because up until when I actually launched a blog, had I been writing the years before, I really wouldn't have had much to say. Not only would I not have had valuable stuff to say, I just wouldn't have had that much to say. So if you do feel like you have something to say, maybe you are further along that spectrum than you think. So that's my answer. I know it's not an amazing answer because it's not the most actionable, but the point here is that, again, there's no perfect time for you to start here. Just set the right expectations with yourself. And if you are willing to wait and just, continue working in the background and learning, then there's nothing wrong with that, because that's exactly what I did. And I feel like I benefited from launching when I did have that expertise. All right, chapter 2 questions. We've got a couple questions here. I think these ones will be a little, actually, maybe not. I think some of these will be a little quicker, but are there really better platforms than Substack? How is a Substack platform different from a blogging website? Also, if we intend to switch to, I think they're saying your blogging website, I use Ghost. Is it easy for us to export and integrate our Substack working into a blogging website? So that's a lot of questions. I'll break into a couple. I'll address them each individually. So are there really better platforms than Substack? I am not the arbiter of platforms. So everything I say here is somewhat of an opinion. Based on everything that I know, I do believe there are better platforms than Substack. Again, opinion, take it for what it's worth. There's people that will disagree with me. We can also think about this maybe in a more nuanced way, which I think is better in terms of the pros and cons of Substack versus other platforms. The pros of Substack are, of course, that it's an out-of-the-box platform, which means that if you're just starting out, especially if you're not technical, especially if you don't have the time to really set up the infrastructure with other platforms that aren't as out-of-the-box, that's a benefit to you, right? Because you can get started right away and there's nothing that you have to worry about other than, creating your Substack account and starting. In particular, it's really good for payments if you're trying to use those, because some of the other platforms either don't have that available to you or they make it a lot harder to do. Now, with that said, that is also kind of simultaneously the con of Substack, in that because it's out of the box, it's just like using any out of the box platform for really anything you're trying to do, in that you run into walls pretty quickly, from my experience. Now, I don't have a blog on Substack, but I have, subscribed to different ones, interacted with the platform, and for what I understand, Substack's SEO is quite bad, not just because, there's 2 reasons for that. It's not optimized for SEO, but then also everything you create, if it's a paid publication, is behind a paywall. But then third, they don't actually let you, have your Substack in most cases on your own domain, in which case every bit of SEO that you're building up is actually for Substack, not yourself. So the first thing is their SEO is not great. The second is that, again, since it's out of the box, they may develop new features, but at least at the moment, there are many that they don't have accessible to Substackers, which includes setting up a referral program, segmenting your users. I'm sure there's many more that, again, just things that you would typically use within either a blogging platform or an email service provider, they don't have. Now that brings me to my second point, which is how is Substack different from a blogging website? Well, Substack allows you to have a newsletter, but then also publish your newsletter content. And in that way, it is kind of functioning as both a blogging platform and an ESP. So in the second live session, I talk about how there are 6 different things that you might consider, and I think 4 or so of these you certainly need. And so 2 of them are a blogging platform and an email service provider. And so if you use Substack, it both allows you to have a running list of subscribers and contact them and also charge them, but it also allows you to publish that information online. Now, if you choose to go with another platform, you typically actually have to have 2 different platforms, which is what I do. So I have, for example, Ghost. This is, behind the scenes of Ghost, which is amazing. Just to give you guys a sense of what it looks like in the back end, it looks almost like Medium. If I click into an article here, it's beautiful editing interface. It's the best editing interface that I've engaged with. Has lots of SEO functionality, lots of integrations. You can, adjust your site in many different ways here. In any case, I love Ghost, but this is my blogging platform. Now, in addition to this, I use MailChimp. So you can see here, MailChimp subscribers. This is where I actually send my emails. And so to answer your question, how is it different? Well, it allows you to do both. In most cases, you don't do both. You have an ESP and a blogging platform. So that is nice in the case of Substack. But again, my opinion is that if you are thinking of, doing this for the long term, you do need a blogging platform and an ESP, but I would recommend using, one blogging platform and one ESP separately, because another thing to consider that I've brought up multiple times in lesson 2 is that you want to find a platform that does something very well. And what I mean by that is, if you take something like Substack, they do certain things pretty well. They do a lot of things pretty well. But Ghost has been dedicated to doing publishing really, really well, and that's all they do. And then something like MailChimp or ConvertKit, they're focused on being a great email service provider, and they do that really well. And they have more functionality within that scope that they focus on. And so that is my recommendation. I also think, I saw a tweet the other day about how Substack was saying that, it's actually great that they're not great at SEO. And I think that is not the way you should be thinking about things. You want to find platforms that are really good at what they should be good at. And Substack is really, I think, pretty good or average at many things. And again, they do that because they're an out-of-the-box solution. But I personally think there are many options that are much better. Now, if we intend to switch to your blogging platform, they're asking, is it easier for us to export or integrate into Substack? Now, to answer that question, I am not completely sure because I've never migrated something from Substack. If you're migrating from something like WordPress, there typically are ways to actually migrate the information pretty easily. I don't know what functionality Substack has in terms of exporting that information into certain formats that you can import into something like Ghost. So unfortunately, I don't have a good answer to that question. However, what I would say is that many people have migrated away from Substack because they've started there and then realized that, their platform fee of 10% is way too high. And once they're at scale, it doesn't make sense for them to stay there. And so there are people who have done this. I would reach out to those people or look for articles online written by those people that explain how they've done this. And maybe they haven't done it, but they've hired someone. Maybe they can put you in touch. I would say that because I'm not sure, it's always with a migration, especially if you're pretty sure that you're going to migrate at some point in the future, it's always better to do it sooner rather than later, right? Because the more kind of debt that you build up on a single platform, the harder it is to migrate over to another platform. So unfortunately, I apologize that I don't have a better answer, but that is my answer. Related to the above question, what do you think of ConvertKit as the main vehicle for writing and distribution instead of Substack? So again, Substack is one of the few platforms that does both the blogging and the ESP. Again, I wouldn't actually view that as necessarily a positive thing, but what I would recommend is setting up, if you're starting from scratch, setting up your ESP and your blogging platform on tools that specialize in those. And in this case, ConvertKit I don't use ConvertKit, but I'm actually considering switching to ConvertKit based on all of the feedback that I've gotten about it from other people. And in that case, you would have ConvertKit as your ESP. And then you would have some platform like Ghost or WordPress as your blogging platform. It takes potentially a little bit more work, but I guarantee you that it is probably going to be worth it in the end, instead of going for the easy solution, which might be Substack, which might actually make your life harder in the long run in terms of growing it. The final thing that I mentioned quite a few times in the live session of lesson 2 is that there are many pros and cons of free and paid publications. Most people start on Substack or a lot of people start on Substack because they can charge for their content. If you do try to charge for content, just remember that the biggest con of charging for your content, which it's not necessarily the right or wrong answer, is just that you lose your biggest distribution vector, which is, you creating content your content is the value that you're providing to people. And by gating it, you're putting that content behind a paywall, right? So people can't access it, but that also means that you can't necessarily distribute your content in the same ways as if you had a free publication. And I would just say this because a lot of Substack, I have no problem with Substack as a company, but I do think that sometimes they sell a certain narrative, and they, at least as of late, have been selling a narrative that, look at all these people making so much money off of Substack, you can do it too. And just keep in mind that if you go through the top paid publications on Substack, not all of them, but many of them, like Matt Taibbi, Pomps on here, a lot of these people, for better or for worse, came with an audience. So please just remember this. I'm not saying other people can't do it and start from, the ground up, but just keep that in mind. And just remember that if you do a paid publication, you are really limiting your ceiling in terms of the people that you reach. So this is the from Wolfram Alpha, where you can see the daily visitors on Substack, because everyone, again, Substack limits you. You can't even put it on your own domain. That is actually one of the biggest things that I would say is a con for Substack. But you can see here what the page views are, and you can see there's maybe of the first 50 or maybe 100, no more than 100, you're already getting into the low hundreds in terms of page views. So just remember, of all of the people using Substack, many, 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 many of them, including some of the people on here which have open free publications, are not getting that much traffic. So again, nothing against Substack, but just keep that in mind. I think Substack has sold a certain narrative as of late, and you just want to be aware of the true pros and cons of, a paid publication, and in particular, the limitations of a platform like Substack. So again, to answer this question directly, I think ConvertKit is amazing from everything I've heard. I have not used it. If you do want to use ConvertKit, you would use that as your ESP, and then you would set up something like Ghost as your main blogging platform. So can you do a demo of Google Analytics? This was actually from the second live session, or week 2, live session A, where it talked about, someone asked how you would utilize Google Analytics. So I'm going to do a quick demo of that. Oops. All right, so this is my GA. You can see I haven't published in a long time, so the numbers are not amazing, but that's okay. This is, you go into your GA and you have this home where you can see, your traffic, overall, your live users, your traffic by channel. This is all great. The place that I utilize, and there's so many ways to use GA effectively, you can also set up dashboards, but the one that I normally look at is if you go into behavior, site content, all pages. Now you can also do content drill down if you have a certain hierarchy of different types of pages, but I'm not going to do that for now because it doesn't make sense for my kind of this demo. So if you get into here, you can see for the last week where you got traffic, and then you can go back for a certain period of time. Let's say I wanted to see from September to the prior month. You select a month in here, for example, or date range in here, and then you can do last 30 days. This selects the date range, but you can also do compare to. I don't know if you guys can see this because it's pretty small. You can do compared to previous period, previous year, etc. So let's say I wanted to see previous period. I would click apply here, and I would be able to see how many page views I've gotten per page here, and how that relates to the prior period, if it's up, down. You can also, in the original answer to this question, I mentioned you want to look at page views. You also want to look at unique page views, but you want to keep an eye on. You don't want to, obsess over this, the on-site metrics, which are average time on site and bounce rate. And so average time on site, pretty straightforward, the amount of time people spend on your site. If your average time on site is really less than a minute, I would find that a little concerning. However, this really depends on what you're creating, right? So if you have a direct conversion landing page, that will typically have a much shorter time on site versus something like a written article. And so you want to look at your average time on page, make sure that it's not, falling off a cliff or something like that. Same thing with bounce rate, where bounce rate is super dependent on the type of site that you've created and even the UX of your site, because bounce rate, and all of these have definitions. If you hover over it, you can see is the percentage of single page sessions in which there was no interaction on the page. So basically, someone who even gets to your page, and even if they glance through the first couple paragraphs, if they don't go and either read another article or click something else, that counts as a bounce, and it counts as a duration of 0 seconds. And so you can see here as well something that if you're selling courses or selling something right now, there's nothing being sold on stephsmith.io or blog.stephsmith.io. You can start to set up conversion actions, and you can set them up. They normally appear over here, where you can start to see of the people who actually got to a specific page, how many of them converted to your specified conversion action, and you can set up multiple conversion actions. I can't show you that here because I don't have a conversion action set up, but that's another thing that you may want to consider setting up. You can also look at things based on a secondary dimension. So for example, right now I'm sorting based on page. I can also, for example, if I wanted to, instead view by source, you can see here, if I want, I can remove this compare to and just look at the last month, so I can see where my traffic's coming from, direct, Google, some other site, for example. So this is interesting. And then you can also, if you wanted to, for example, if I wanted my page here and I wanted to see my sources per article, if that makes sense. So you can, oops, did not mean to do that. Go back. So I can see, what got the most was actually my homepage and with direct. But then the next is how to be great direct. And I can, for example, search this. This is not a great example, but if I wanted to, trying to think of if I could show a better example of this, but if I wanted to, for example, just look up how to be, well, actually, in this case, I could, if I just wanted to see this article, source and medium. I could click that article and then I could see just the source and medium for that article. Now I'm trying to show you guys actually something else. So if I go back, just go to all pages. You can see, actually, I don't know if you guys can see this at the top. You can see right now it's how to be great. So I can just do all up here to get back to that section. I can add back in source and medium here if I want. What I'm trying to show is actually, if I just wanted to find, let's say I had a bunch of articles with, with a certain part of the URL, like slash article slash whatever. In that case, imagine I'm typing articles in here, but instead right now I'm just typing great in here. It's going to look for anything with a URL in here with whatever I'm searching, so you can also filter by that. This I can exit out. There's also advanced search. So if I wanted to look for include only sources or medium containing Google, for example, and you can make it exact, match and things like that. I could do this, and you can see only things including Google are included in here. You can also see, more rows, for example, in which case you can, once you have the information here that you want, let's say I just wanted to export anything related to Google as a source, I can export it as a CSV or Excel file and do more analysis outside of GA. Now, if I exit this and I just look at source, something that I mentioned on the last call is that, oops, this is, again, it's only including Google right now. So if I exit out of that, I get all these sources for the last week of things that sent me some sort of traffic. And what I can do here is basically, or what I mentioned that people should pay attention to is you want to make sure, this isn't super actionable, but for your top traffic sources, especially if you're using any sort of paid traffic, because you're paying for those page views, you can also keep an eye on the average time on site and the bounce rate for particular sources. So let's say if I wanted to look for the last, they don't have the last year, so I'm just going to go for 2020. Or actually, I'll do October to, October to September 30th. So this is the last year. And you can adjust. You can see I had a big viral spike in October of last year for the How to Be Great, the writing article. You can also adjust this per week or per month. So it's a little easier if you're doing a long time range to take a look. And I can also, as I mentioned before, I can do compare to the previous period, in which case it's going to compare to the previous period of the prior year. So you can see here, it's comparing September to September, basically, of 2018 to 2019, and then 2019 to 2020. And you can see it by different sources. And again, there's so many ways to utilize GA, and so this is maybe going a little bit down a rabbit hole where you're seeing this comparison month over month versus the prior year. So I'm going to exit out of this compare to and just stick with this view for now. But what's important, or maybe not important, but just maybe it's a lesson if you're not in marketing, is you'll notice that the time on site and the bounce rate will differ across channels. Maybe that's not super surprising. Google tends to, not always, actually in this case it doesn't look like it's the case, but tends to have a lower bounce rate than other channels, because typically if you're getting to a site through Google, it will be more aligned with what you're looking for, versus if you have paid channels. So paid channels being, Facebook ads or something like that, the intent is different and someone clicking on it is more likely to bounce. So just something to keep aware of, or to be aware of. But just to, I'm gonna go back to page. Oh, this is freezing, sorry. So just to summarize, you have a ton of different things that you can analyze in GA. What I would recommend, if you do care about, tracking your metrics, seeing how things are going over time, just focus on a couple things. Go into site content, go to all pages. You'll be able to see metrics based on source, based on articles, and things like that. And then some things to keep an eye on, but not over-optimize, are things like time on site and bounce rate. You can see that by article, but you can also see it by source. And there's many other things here that you can use, that you can look up by campaign or landing page. And, if you're not a marketer, don't, get lost in all this stuff, because it's not all super actionable, but you can see most of the information in GA in this, behavior, site content, all pages section. You can also see things like site speed or acquisition. There's so many different ways or places that you can look into GA, but I would focus here if you are just starting out. And again, if you do have something paid that you're trying to sell, you can add a goal, and you can Google how to do that. There's so many articles that show you, and you can add a goal so that you basically can see of people, whether it's subscribers or people purchasing a course, how many people getting to a certain page are actually converting. Hopefully that was helpful. And a basic demo of GA. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and I can answer them. Final question, chapter 3, do you have any tips on hiring an editor for cheap, or a copywriter who can tweak your headlines or the articles so that they're not too boring? Those are two separate questions, I would say. So first, any tips on hiring an editor for cheap? Now, it depends on what you're trying to do. If you are, how do I say this? Like, if you are writing stuff just to go and rank for places with SEO, sometimes you can get away with hiring a cheap editor and just giving them very clear instructions. If that's the case, you should really know how to do SEO well. Because if you're writing stuff that's not as much targeted for SEO, and you're actually trying to write good content or amazing content that goes viral, let me be clear that you can do both. You can optimize for SEO and do that. I talk about that in the book. But let's say you're just focused on trying to get things to go viral and trying to get things to be shared. It's really hard to hire a cheap editor that can do that for you, because you're kind of just trying to get something that works well for really cheap, and that often doesn't align. And so what I would say here is that you should figure out how to create great content yourself, and then eventually you may be able to train someone on some of those principles. But even then, I would say great editors tend to actually not be cheap, because they are extremely valuable. And so unfortunately, I don't have tips on hiring a great editor for cheap. But what I will say is that I'm just going to pull this up because it was mentioned in the group. Someone in the DCR chat, Peter, has actually managed to, he's a non-English speaker, and he's managed to hire someone through Upwork to basically go through his work with certain guidelines for reference. Now, this is an option for you. I haven't personally done it, but just keep in mind here again, Peter's a non-native speaker, and he's specifically using an editor for this very clear purpose. So if that's your goal, where basically you're looking for an editor to just look over your work to, for technical grammar or things like that, that is certainly doable, and places like Upwork can work. I've never done that myself. But if you're looking for someone to write full articles, that's very hard to do unless, again, you have clear instructions for that individual. And then the second question is, can you hire a copywriter who can tweak your headlines or articles so they're not too boring? Again, I have never done this. I've worked at companies that do have someone who kind of does do a final layer of editing, in which case it's hard to find someone who does that well, who doesn't work for kind of like a larger team. What I mean by that is it's hard to find someone that does that well, who's willing to do that on a super contract basis for an individual, versus, there are people who do this at news agencies and review like a cohort of reporters' work. But it's hard to find someone to do that on an individualistic basis. You can follow Peter's advice potentially and find someone on Upwork, but I unfortunately don't have a bunch of advice here, because the people that I have hired in the past as writers have all been full-time or at least part-time, and they come from particular backgrounds and were not cheap necessarily. So I apologize for not having better answer there. I think it's better to, at least at the beginning, figure out how you create great content, so that in the future, if you do want to hire, you can operationalize that with certain principles that you've built up over time. But in general, I think people sometimes think that writers can be cheap, but if you're finding great writers, they can actually be pretty expensive. So that is the answers to the, 7 questions here. I will again be doing this for chapters 4 to 6 in a couple weeks. So if you're listening to this and you do have any questions for those chapters, you can either attend the live sessions directly, you can add them to this document, and I will get to them. So I'll link to this document in the recording. So thanks everyone for listening. Hope you found this helpful. And thanks, of course, for buying my book. See ya.